Look, I need you watching our backs. You're a better shot than I am.
Huh, really?
No?
Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Gears of War 4 Insane Difficulty video walkthrough. This is Act 5, Chapter 1, Convergence. So, the worst part about this first fight against these good old friendly pouncers is the fact that you're going to be carrying in whatever status you had at the end of the Swarmak fight into this particular encounter. And that's almost always going to be a character that does not have many munitions on him. So my advice is to immediately swap weapons with one of your teammates and then proceed to play the pouncers off the same way you've always kind of done it, which is to stay out of their reach, stay out of their quills, and then just hit them as hard as you can while your team hopefully distracts them. And that's pretty much what you see here. Whenever you see them jump your teammate, you can go up to them and hit them. It'll put them on the belly, and then you can do some big damage with something from up close. You can chuck her through grenades if you want, you can grenade tag them. There's a couple of ways to deal some good damage there. And of course, if you can get them glowing, then you can come through with a lovely chainsaw, which is nice to do, but not always situationally beneficial, because you can't do it all the time, thanks to how that mechanic works. But never sit on a piece of cover like this, because you are not covered from him on that side, and if he decides to come for you, then he can do some quick damage with those quills, and luckily it looks like he wants Del. So oh no, he might want me. As it jumps across here, starts attacking Kate, does a little scream. I'm just going to keep hitting it with the Gnasher. The Gnasher does incredible damage, but it also does kind of shitty damage too. It's one of those weapons where if you can put it against their temple, you can do extreme damage. But at the range I was at, it's hurting, but it's not hurting like it should. And I say like it should. It's not like it should hit that hard at that range. I disagree with that. But it should hit hard. You know, it's a shotgun. That's the point of it. In my opinion, in Gears, I don't think the shotgun should hit further out than 2 to 3 meters. I think the pellet should just not get that far, because it's one of those guns where if you are close enough to touch somebody with it, they should die, but at the same time, if you're not in that touching range, it shouldn't be effective, and the person with the Lancer should win, because that is the balance of how Gears has always kind of worked. It's the rock, paper, scissors between the guns. But this sequence here, what a wonderful moment. We push forward, we get kind of a confusing moment with Jin, as it almost looks like the game is insinuating that the Swarm can hack the DBs, and I thought we were going to get some kind of weird mutating DBs, and instead we get them playing off each other, the Swarm versus the robots, and then we're in the middle of it. And you're like, wow, this is going to be great. There's this massive, you know, escalating war happening as the robots, and there's going to be Condors coming over dropping reinforcements, there's going to be, you know, Guardians and everything. And then you realise that it's just everybody kill us while pretending to kill each other again. And it's nowhere near as exciting as I hope it would be. Because we're not there yet, guys. We haven't got to the point where we can have those kind of moments that feel great. And there are some games that did it really well, I felt. Even older games like Turok. Say what you want about those games, the dinosaurs were dangerous to everybody. So if you ended up getting a raptor chasing you and there was a passive soldier there, it would go for him too. And that was all the way back on the N64, so, you know, the excuses just aren't there. It seems like they don't want to have that kind of three-way feeling of mistrust. Like, I think it sounds great, the idea that you can have a friend, like a temporary alliance. That to me sounds really interesting. And I think it's because I've done a lot of this, you know. I've shot people a lot in third-person shooters. I've hugged cover, I've backed up off my team and sniped people at ranges because the enemy is very dangerous. I've done a lot of this, and so have you. So the new things nowadays tend to be performance, have you noticed? Like, we don't really get new mechanics, and when we do, they're extensions of existing ones. We don't really get new scenarios, new situations, and when we do, they stand out, and we don't really get these, you know, these alliances that I mentioned, these situations where you put into a spot where you don't really know who the enemy is. And I like the idea of that. I like the idea of it not just being, you know, the binary difficulty of a game. But once again, all the improvements nowadays seem to be that they run at slightly better frame rate, so that they're a little bit higher resolution, or that, whoa, it's 4K, everybody get your dick out. Like, that seems to be it. And that's beautiful, and it's great, and it's fine, but I want the gameplay to evolve the most. That's the area that I want to see the biggest improvements, because there are so many features now that we don't even realise that have become standards in gaming. They've become the archetypes and the paradigms from what other things are built off. They're essentially the blueprint of good design, and they weren't always so. And when you go back to these older games, you realise that there are certain things that just weren't standardised in those early games, and now they are, and now we don't seem to get those things that aren't standardised in games, if you get me. By the way, this is just a Scion who has a drop shot, and because he's so ridiculously good with the drop shot, he will always put it where you are. So all you have to do is wait for it and then roll away. It's an incredibly fair weapon because of how accurate he is. If he was a dumb bastard like we can be at times, he'd kill you every time because he'd do gormless shots like I do, but he doesn't, so he's incredibly fair. But once that moment is done, you want to swap out this rifle if it's empty with one of your buddies, because they will put ammunition in it for themselves, and then you can get ready for the next encounter, because there's a couple of pretty tough encounters coming up. This is definitely a mission that's got some, you know, some decent fights in it, but for the most, you're not going to come across anything that's been as rough as a couple on Act 3 and that one boss fight on Act 4. However, there is an incredibly difficult defensive section coming up, so do not feel ashamed if you have any difficulty with that area. It took me a good 40 minutes to find the place that I'm going to show you, and I was getting really frustrated just because I didn't have the ammunition to put down the enemies the game needed me to kill. And that's always a tough situation to be in, feeling like you do not have the tools to do the job. But speaking about, you know, new mechanics that aren't archetypes yet, that haven't become in place of everything, the active reload was one of them a long time ago, and it still kind of is. The active reload is the finest piece of feedback for the player that is also gameplay, because it's a slight minigame, that fits so naturally and dynamically into the game you barely realise that you're doing it, but it also has a profound effect. And it's one of the single and sole most awesome features that's never really been ripped off. All the games that rip it off are bad games. None of the good games have implemented anything similar or come with it forward, because it's such a good idea. Like, we don't get on at people who rip off, you know, carrying 2 guns instead of being able to carry an arsenal like you used to be back in the day. This is just how games have become, and everybody goes, oh, it's realism. We don't get on at people where games have cover systems. Oh, you just ripped off Kill Switch. You know, we don't get on at things like that. These things that share similarities, we just kind of accept it. Oh, you have a wave-based survival mode. Well, you're just ripping off Gears of War Horde. Well, no, it's just survival. You came up with a great idea, we're running with it, and that's how innovation happens. That's how new mechanics become things. And the active reload is something that is really, really good, and I would have took it even further. I really would have. Like, think about it. Every active you get post the first active gets significantly more difficult to do. If you can do 3 to 4 to 5 actives in a row, you'll get to the point where the next one can be like a dot. It's barely a line. Oh, there's a nest immediately here, guys, so if you rush it, you can use any explosive to seal it. And then over here, there's another spawn, but as you saw, explosives on Insane might as well not even be called explosives, because they don't do shit sometimes. It's a little frustrating. Maybe I didn't hit the sweet spot. All I feel is that was close enough to that spawn. They should have all sprayed, in my opinion, but the game said no, we must amend for this. And this fight here is rife with enemies rushing towards the right-hand side of your area and flanking you and fighting your buddies. So I like to come down here because they can only push down here after I've put a couple thousand Lancer rounds into them, and there's not many things on Serra that can survive that many. So that's a good thing. But as I was saying though, the active reload, if you don't know, adds damage. It adds damage, it increases your reload speed, and it might even make your gun fire a little faster. I think it might increase the speed of your gun that fires, and that might be how it gets the damage. I guess I haven't really looked into it from a scientific perspective because I haven't seen any information that's come from a developer about it, but it will exist and you can find it. It's just what you feel from how you use it. So you get the faster reload, you get the increased damage and the perceptibly faster shots, and it feels empowering, and it's what it's meant to do. But it's not overpowered because it does run out. You can't keep it indefinitely, and of course it's a skill-based game to get it. So to get that kind of feedback you have to put in the timing, and without the timing you don't get it. But I would have made it so that it stacked, and I would have made it so that each active was harder to get, but could be got if you knew the timing and you nailed it. So every time you get a successive active, it just scales what it does. Increases its damage, increases the speed of the reload, increases the speed of the gun. I would have made it so that if you knew how to successfully chain actives, you could put some serious firepower down the range. And of course in the multiplayer it could have had rather large costs. It could have been really effective against humans, and it could have led to frustrations, but the multiplayer was an afterthought. It came way after the gameplay had been figured out, and they don't really care that much about balance. They allowed people to stand in doorways and trap you in rooms. Like, the fact that Gears 1 was so successful and fun to me is because it had the goof, because it wasn't completely balanced and everything worked. It had a nice mixture of broken and functional things. Against the AI though, it would have just enabled you to really focus on dealing damage, because you get into situations, what I'm in right now, where I'm getting a couple of actives here, I'm peppering him with some shots, he's shooting me, I'm going back into cover, I'm getting another active, and this is kind of a stalemate as I mess that up and get off cover because I'm being rushed, and this is a really scary moment, and thankfully the Locust did not pursue me. If he'd have pursued me, then I was dead. There was nothing I could do. I would never have got as close to cover as I did, because they do too much damage and they're too accurate. But it isn't insane or unknown to get 3 to 4 actives in a row. You pepper a few shots, you're back in cover, you might as well go for an active to get some extra damage. So you could have it so that each weapon was balanced in a different way, so that the active, for instance with the Lancer, I don't think the Lancer should get, you know, super ridiculously, what was that mutator in Gears 3 where it turns your active reloads into just ridiculous? I wouldn't want it to be like that, and I would have the Lancer be probably the weakest one, because it fires fast as it is, it does good damage. You don't want every Lancer round turning into a shotgun round or a boom shot round, it wouldn't work. But what I would do is things like the shotgun, things like, for instance, the snub, I would make those increase in damage a little bit more than perhaps the Lancer would, because those are weapons where the shotgun's already powerful, you just need the consistency of it. You could have it so that every additional active on the shotgun took to the spread in, till it got to the point where it was a really uniform spread that you could predict and understand, and it was guaranteed, you know, to pretty much shit on people. Things like that, like the boom shot. The boom shot's already intermittent, hit and miss, and I don't like it at all in this game because it just doesn't seem to work as it should and how I like it to work. In the multiplayer it'll probably be different because of course up against humans the damage is so high in the multiplayer that all the explosives just make you jib anyway. But I would definitely have just an incentive to get people to nail the best mechanic in Gears. You know, they took it out of the multiplayer in Judgment, and it's one of the reasons I never played the multiplayer, because to me, you can't take away things that Gears did perfectly. You can't take away features that I think Gears has innovated and made awesome, and I would love to see more of these features. And I was playing a game called Shadow Warrior 2 yesterday, because it's just come out on PC, and I thought I'd check it out. And this is a game that I've had a lot of interest in because it's a really old school shooter, and I'm not a person who has the massive penchant for old school things. I don't look at the idea of reinventing these early series and making them homages to the early series as the best way to go forward with games, because I was there on those early series, guys, and I played them. I don't need those anymore. I've had that era of gaming. I've rocket jumped, I've circle strafed, I've side strafed, I've hoarded ammo and armour and the best weapons and all that kind of stuff. I've done that. You know, I was there. I might not have been, you know, as cognitive as I am now because I was much younger, but I enjoyed it then and it was fun, and now I want to keep moving forward. But the thing that I really liked about Shadow Warrior 2, and I don't know if it's in the first game, was that you have this dash. And in a first-person shooter, mobility just seems to be this thing that they set aside for jumping over stuff. Like, they'll enable you to run on a wall, but then when you're fighting enemies, you feel like a fucking brick. And I've never understood this disconnect. They want to give you this illusion of parkour and mobility, and then everything has such good aiming that you can't do any of the shit. Like, on realistic mode, try running on the fucking walls on Black Ops 3. All you're going to do is get killed, because all you are is a massive target and they're all really good at shooting you. So it's not functional at all, and it doesn't complement the gameplay. All it does is allow people to be silly bastards in the multiplayer and piss off all the people that liked COD 4. Like, that's it. That's all it does. It doesn't add anything, because you're not allowed to do it. It doesn't complement the game. But in Shadow Warrior 2, the enemies seem to be a good mixture of people that can fire projectiles, people that rush you, and the projectiles don't seem to be just, you know, laser bullets that hit you instantly the moment they're fired. They seem to be things that you can react to and counter and move to. So I was using this jump and this dash and this dodge and doing all this kind of stuff and running around with the sword, and then I realised you could do more than one dodge. You could kind of do 2 quick dodges, you waited a little bit and do another one. And it enabled you to be incredibly mobile, and admittedly, I was on a mouse and keyboard. I was not the most mobile I could have been, but I was jumping and dashing to the side and, like, stingering with his sword and dashing out and dashing about, and just this idea of this dash in a genre where you generally don't see that kind of thing completely sold me on playing that game. And I was thinking, what other games have I played where it's been something similar to this? And all I could think of was like Halo, when they added that little dash, and one of the Call of Duties, I think it was Advanced Warfare. But the problem with those dashes is that they do like 2 yards, and then you have to wait for them to recharge, because they don't want the game to be too broken. Whereas Shadow Warrior 2 is literally dash your tits off and feel good about it, and it felt great. So I played this game that had this. And it's not really new, because there's plenty of first-person shooters have had a dodge, but just the fact that it embraced it, rather than, like, kind of disincentivize you using it by the way that the difficulty and things worked, it felt so fun. It felt mobile, and one of the things I love about Gears 4 is just how nice the game feels when I'm moving about it. Like, when I have to go somewhere in Gears, I don't just run there. I am bouncing into cover, I'm bouncing off walls, I'm doing all the fun stuff, I'm doing the new mantling system, the sprint into mantling system. I'm getting an active while I'm running, all these kind of things that it allows you to do that makes moving feel good. And games fuck this up so much, because for some reason, they don't value mobility anymore, and I don't know why. It's like we went to this one lesson that everybody had to take at school, and they told us that moving around and it being fun and being one of the draws of the game wasn't why we should be playing. We should all be incredibly weighted and have momentum and inertia, and every action should have recovery, and we shouldn't be able to exploit anything that's fast moving, because then we might not hug the chest high wall in Brownie Stan. Like, I just don't get it. I really don't. Something explodes right there, taking on the Scion, and a nice little light show there as we test our epileptic reflex and get on with the game. But I really like how the drop shot looks on your back. I love the contrast of the yellow. It literally looks like a mining tool. And there's something about that. You know, Dead Space 1 is one of those games that, you know, when I read about what they were doing, my imagination just got piqued. How many games do you play, or do you see, where when you read about them, your imagination goes nuts and ends up coming up with things that far surpass anything that was in the game? Dead Space is that game for me, and that's not me saying that I'm more creative and imaginative than the designers of that game. That's not what I'm talking about. I had an infinite canvas. They had restrictions and money and time and realities that I just, you know, when we're all like, oh, I can't wait for this, I wonder if it'll do this and this and this. We don't have those. They do. That's the reality. And they did great things with that game, but when I heard about it, the stuff I was imagining, like, I was imagining that you would go into storerooms, like, at the end of From Dusk Till Dawn, and you would be ripping open, like, crates and shit and storage utilities and making some kind of ridiculous mining tool to fuck up dudes. I thought there was going to be all kinds of shit. And then you play it, of course, and it is a bunch of mining tools, but they all conveniently look like handheld pistol things, don't they? They're all convenient rifle things with lasers that help you aim, and when you think about it, all you're doing is shooting a different variety of bullet. But still, it's fucking cool. It's a cool idea. And the fact that Isaac wasn't a soldier, he was a miner, I thought they would have played on that a lot more. And then when you combine that with how they mentioned that the necromorphs, depending on how you attacked them, would depend on how they mutated, and certain things weren't the best strategy, like shooting for the head was going to make them transform into something you didn't want to see, and it could have these horrible effects. And then we got the game, and that did really happen, you know. It was kind of there a little bit, like the fat guys, if you shot them in the belly, they let out those awful things. And, you know, if you shot the heads off monsters, it generally didn't do too much to them, and they kept coming. But what happened in that game? It became shoot the ankle, shoot the arm, didn't it? Shoot the ankle, shoot the arm. The good old Dead Space yarn. That's literally what that game is, and there's nothing wrong with that. I worshipped that game and enjoyed it. But I had these fucking dreams that it was going to be way different and way more in depth. Like, you know what really surprised me about Dead Space? And this is not a detriment to it, guys. I'm just talking about it because there's nothing much to see here. It's just standard fighting. We're pushing a hill. We're in a disadvantage. There's a Troika/turret that's going to be covering fire on us. And there's a lot of dudes here, so just take your time, pick your shots, and don't get too close because they are Boltox. That's a grenade too, so be very careful. But in Dead Space, the one thing that surprised me is once you realise that things like the plasma cutter were legit, really, really powerful, even though you got it at the beginning, you realise that the standard slasher necromorph, you could take its arm out, you could take its leg out. You would always take its leg first because it slowed it down, take its arm to kill it, and that was the quickest way to get the multiplier on the damage, wasn't it? Take a knee, take an arm, you won, pretty much. If you could take both at the same time, you did good damage. Line rifle was fantastic for that. Line gun, sorry. They never introduced an enemy that was kind of a faux slasher, that when you took its leg, it became what it was meant to be, or it became more powerful than you can imagine, or whatever, Obi-Wan Kenobi syndrome. Like, can you imagine something that looked like a slasher that they introduced every so often in a group of a slasher, where you shot its leg, and it immediately spawned like 4 other legs and started crab walking twice as fast as it was able to move? Would that not be the most terrifying thing in Dead Space? It would. Because that's the scary thing about that game, when shit gets close and when shit's fast. And it never happened. Because all you did was take legs. You took legs the entire game. Instead of headshots, it became leg shots. And this is, once again, guys, I'm not knocking Dead Space. I love that game. It's a great game. Dead Space 3 can die, because that's a terrible game. And I could analyse that for hours. But we're never going to get the Dead Space that I wanted now that we've got all this great technology and all this ability for all this really imaginative, awesome, scary, The Thing-inspired John Carpenter stuff, because Dead Space kind of got put into its own narrow groove, didn't it? It moved away from the horror, it moved away from the creativity of the horror, and kind of became a standard third-person shooter with horror elements. And by the time you got to the third game, there was more emphasis and creativity put into combining weapons, which is a feature that the game never needed, than there was in any of the creatures that you fought in the game. And in my opinion, when you have a horror game where the most interesting aspect of your game is the enemies, so it should be, because it's a fucking horror game and they're the antagonists, if you're putting all your time and effort into combining the weapons and not making creative weapons, to me you've already failed. And it's one of those weird things where by the end of Dead Space 3, it was just a standard third-person shooter with the ability to stick two completely non-essential guns together to make something superfluous. Like, it's really that to me. That's how I felt about that game, and I never felt like they ever truly got to where they could have got with the necromorphs. I just didn't think that there was enough to it. Then I think they kind of they got really relaxed, and that was it, you know. And then of course there was a lot of troubles on that production, and they forced co-op into it and things, and it never became what I thought that game was going to be. I thought it could have been something really, really special, and the first 2 games have some really special stuff in them, as I get flanked here and have no idea how. Don't know how he did that, but he's pretty good. Look at Kate, just looking at that door. That's exactly what you want from your little squad of resistance fighters against this new looming threat. Stare at the geometry, do your thing. But features like that, you know, I love mining tools in games. I love the idea of using something against its intended use to survive. I think that's just great, you know. And it's not done enough in games because it's difficult to do that, you know. It's difficult to have those kind of elements into a game without them feeling really gamey. And unfortunately, the term gamey and the idea of something feeling like a video game is something that they're trying to get away from for some reason. It's looked at negatively, you know. Like being an anime nerd on prom night is looked at negatively. It's this weird thing of, you know, you can't like video games for video games. You have to like them because they're doing some kind of incredibly important and poignant social commentary. No, it's a fucking video game. Like, please, god damn it. We don't have to be ashamed of playing Dungeons and Dragons in the basement anymore. You don't have to hide your Yu-Gi-Oh cards. If you like something, you like it, you know? You're not a fag. You're not some random insult that people like to say. Like, the world is changing, and people are getting over the fact that we don't have to all have hairy chests and want to, you know, lift heavy things. It's this weird culmination of, why do we have to hide or lie or try to somehow change what we like? I don't get that. I like games. I like sitting down with a controller and playing games, and I like it to be a game, you know? There's nothing wrong with that, and there's a massive audience of people who feel the same as I do. Yet, it's this dirty word in our industry, and I don't know why. Because if it wasn't for, get this, games, we wouldn't be here.